two-way frequency tables. So two-way tables have information that will total at the row and another total that will do the columns. Okay, so you would have information over here. So we have on this one, someone did a survey and they asked boys and girls what their preferred pet was. So we need to know how many girls and boys and what their preferred pets were. So we have dog, cat, and then other. And then down here in the corner is going to be the grand total, and that's going to be how many people were asked in the survey total. Okay, so the total along the rows here need to add up to 50, and this column here, these two need to add up to 50 as well. Okay, so a two-way relative frequency table is when we have the word relative in there, that's when you're going to be doing percentages or decimals depending on what they're asking you for. So you have them done either by doing the joint relative frequency or your marginal relative frequency. So in order to fill in this chart, and I'm going to use information from that same chart down here, in order to find the relative frequency for the amount of girls that said dog, I am going to take that total and I'm going to divide it by the grand total. So a joint relative frequency is you dividing a frequency like this number 10, a frequency that is not in the total columns, the total areas, the rows or the columns with the totals, and you're dividing it by the grand total of how many people were in the survey total. So in this case, the relative, so for dog, for girl, the relative or joint relative frequency is going to be 10 divided by the 50. So 10 over 50, and that ends up being 1/5, and 1/5 as a decimal is 0.2. Okay, or if they ask you for a percent, 20%. So sometimes you're asked for a percent, sometimes you're asked for the decimal. If you're asked for the percent, you're gonna have to go through all of that. I make it into a fraction, I get my decimal, I change that into percent by multiplying that decimal by 100. Okay, the marginal relative frequency is once you have these totals in here, is that you're taking a total and you are dividing it by the number of the total number of the grand total. So if I were to look at this column here, so 10 and 12 is 22. And if I want the marginal relative frequency, I'm looking at this total of 22, I am going to take, and I did it down here, I'm going to take my 22 and I'm going to divide by the total of 50. So 22 divided by 50 ends up being, what, 11 over 25. And then if you do your math, or you use a calculator, and you're going to get your decimals, so 25 goes into this 4 times, that's 100, bring this down, so it's exactly 0.44, which as a percent is 44%. So this here is 44% of the total of the amount of people that were surveyed said dog. And for the girl up here, so 20% of the girls said dog. So this is what you're doing with two-way tables. So you have information that goes across in totals and goes in columns and totals, 2 sets of information. So in this case, we have gender and preferred pet. Your joint relative frequency are the frequencies of these items that are not in the total divided by the grand total, whether it's in decimal or percent. And marginal relative frequency is taking the totals and dividing them by the grand total to get the percents in each of those total columns. So my dog column is 44%. I can also have a girl column of a percent over here, and they have to add up to, if you look at this one, 50 out of 50, this one is 100%. So 100% of the people is 50. So my percents, so this 44% and these 2% have to add up to 100 going to the right, and the column going down, these 2% are going to have to add up to 100 as well. So everything's going to add up to 100%, and everything is out of your grand total, which is in the corner, and you're going to do percents for each and everything. No matter how big your chart is, when they ask you for joint relative frequency or any type of relative frequency, you're doing decimals or percents. So marginal and joint. If you're doing conditional, which was also on ours, conditional, relative frequency, is your joint relative frequency divided by your marginal relative frequency. So if we look at this, so my joint was 20%, and if I'm doing, and actually in this case it was 0.2, and I'm dividing that by my 0.44. So my 0.2 divided by my 0.44, 1, 2, 1, 2. So 44 is going to go into 200. Let's see, times 4, 176. Okay, so 4 times 176. So that's 4, 9, 8, 7. It's 240. So I can do this 5 times, right? So your relative frequency in here is going to be about 45, or conditional relative frequency is going to be about 45%. So that's conditional. Conditional was joint divided by marginal. Joint is your squares that are not the total divided by the grand total, and your marginal are the totals of each of the columns or rows divided by the grand total.